Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I am your host. This is going to be kind of a really short one this week, mainly because I'm deciding not to broach the comic state side of things, if only because it's still ongoing, and at this point, I really do not care. It's only drawing more attention to them that they don't deserve, and it's becoming something that is honestly pretty disheartening. Let's move on from that. The big news this week is that Disney Plus is going to be hosting a rental for the new Mulan remake. What that means for comics is that this is probably going to be Disney's testing ground to see whether or not they can start releasing some of their old backlog, like Black Widow and like New Mutants, on the service without facing much of a loss. It faced some controversy though because it is going to be a rental unlike Artemis Fowl, and it's going to be an extra cost. So it's going to come around to about $42 for someone who hasn't got a Disney Plus yet. And that seems pretty steep, especially steep considering that a lot of the other direct-to-video quarantine releases have been around like 20 or so. So this is more than twice that. And that's a shame. It really is, because it does seem to be constraining the release. And if this is Disney's attempt to see if there's a market for this kind of thing, if the market is sustainable, and then it's going about it pretty strictly and pretty precariously. And if it does work, then it might not for other releases like New Mutants that don't have a kind of built-in fan base like Mulan and like the MCU. So it's going to be really hard for those to really get the traction to make $42 worth it, if that's the bar that Disney is trying to set. Anyway, let's move on to what I read this week. We don't have that much. The first thing we have is Captain Ginger, Season 2, Number 5. And this was a pretty boring issue. Nothing much happens in it. It's just the characters regrouping and then not even explaining what's been going on, just more vaguely explaining what's been going on. It's something that isn't really that intensive character-wise. It's not plot-intensive. It's a lot of vagaries. It's a lot of intimations about the world around them. It's about implications, and it's not really about delving into anything. And that's a shame, because you think that when the characters finally regroup, and when the different factions, both cats and dogs and their subsets, get together, we'd start to see more. But instead, we're just getting a lot more foreshadowing and a lot more of world building in quotes, because it's not really world building. It's just vague plot dropping. And that's something that is not the wheelhouse here. It's not the main allure. It makes it seem a little bit more open than it is, and it draws away from the rather engaging plot and character threads that I'm actually really invested in. So this feels like a waste of an issue. It feels like a throwaway issue. You could probably skip to the finale of this season and not miss a beat, because nothing really happens in this other than characters saying really weird, like, I guess, again, atmospheric world building stuff, and then they move on off screen and the issue ends. So that's a shame, because this is a series I really like, and it doesn't seem to be actually doing anything that is worth much. It doesn't seem to be satisfying in the least, and I know it can be. I think the last issue before this one was a lot better than this at capturing any sense of enthusiasm or emotion, and this is just 3 steps back. Overall, 2 films middle, and hopefully the finale brings it home and lands on its feet. After this, it was Strange Adventures number 4. And much like Captain Ginger, this is a very bland issue. Nothing happens. Like I said about the previous 3 issues, it's very much Tom King on autopilot, but not even on his autopilot. It's very paint by numbers. This one most especially, because the Ron flashbacks this time are very, very cliche and very formulaic. And the fact of the matter is that it's clearly trying not to be. It's clearly trying to be something a bit more in-depth, a little more juxtaposed to the main stuff. But the fact that it's not doing anything worthwhile or interesting or actually enveloped in it means that it just comes out very superficial. It comes out very flat. And when you're trying to hew to, I guess, a little bit more of the old school pulpy standards, even those weren't as flat as Tom King is making them seem. And you're not really getting anything. The only allure here, the only draw point to anything that's going on is the Shaner art, because Shaner can do really great sort of pulpy stuff. He did the art for Jeff Parker's Flash Gordon series. Probably the only good part of that too. He knows his stuff. He knows how to work around and make something seem a bit more old school adventure heroics in terms of style and atmosphere and energy. And Tom King is not taking advantage of that in the best way. And he's also not taking advantage of using that to contrast stuff, because the main stuff is just too sterile. It's too bland. It's just, again, more of Mr. Terrific going around being Mr. Terrific. Like, it's just so one note in terms of how Tom King is using Mr. Terrific. It's like an old punchline that he's been beating into the ground again and again, and doesn't really do much for Mr. Terrific. It doesn't do much for the world around. It doesn't do much for Adam Strange. And in the end, it's just a really sustained, droning sound of an issue. It's just, here's some adventures, and here's some mystery, and I'm not going to do anything with either of them, other than the very basics. And the fact of the matter is that because everything else is so basic, the plot itself, the stuff that I guess is meant to be implicated and intimated and I guess sort of seeded out, becomes so much more obvious and blunt and just, not that interesting. It comes off very forced and honestly off-putting. So overall, 1 thumb middle, 1 thumb down. Again, this is not even Tom King even trying. And if Tom King was at least trying, it might be worse, but at least it'd be worth talking about. There'd be stuff to dig into. And this, there's nothing. It's just nostalgic pulp, rose-colored flashback filter, contrasted with espionage intrigue. And it's not doing either of those well, or the connecting rod between them at all either. Moving ahead, we have what I watched this week. And let's start off with the big release this week, which is the second season of Netflix's The Umbrella Academy. And I'm going to start this off by saying that this was awful. This was terrible. This was maybe one of the worst seasons of a comic show that I've ever seen. And that's a shame because season 1 was my favorites. I know this is kind of a controversial opinion, and I've heard people I know and mutuals like that say otherwise, but I preferred the first season a lot over the comics. And this felt like 3 steps back, but also in the worst ways possible, because it makes all of the cardinal sins of a bad second season. For one, it tries to course correct. It tries to be more like the comics. But the fact of the matter is that the first season already took a lot from the second arc of the comics that this is trying to be like. So there's nothing left. And instead of creating anything new, like the end of the first season was going to, with them going back in time and becoming young again and trying to help Vanya that way, this replaces it with nothing. And so instead it just pads itself out. It's nothing but filler. It's nothing but stalling. And it also, I guess, tries to play the hits too much. It goes over the same beats. The same things happen. The same gags happen over and over again because there's no story left here. There's nothing to grab onto. There's nothing to delve into because the characters are reset. The storyline is reset. The character arcs are non-existent. The plot threads no longer matter. It's nothing but the gags, set pieces, and the over-the-top stylization, which wouldn't be bad. Being confident, and this season is really confident in your style, in your atmosphere, in your tone, is really important. But it doesn't mean anything unless the characters are worth investing in, and they no longer are because it doesn't even follow through. Vanya, who was one of the most interesting characters of the first season, is pretty much an entirely different character here, mainly because it allows them to sidestep all the interesting stuff they could have done for her character in order to make her, I guess, more palatable, more saccharine, and I guess more likable. And it robs that character of anything engaging, anything worth being interesting, and anything really worth exploring because it decides not to. It just kind of bypasses it. And you see that a lot this season. A lot of things are bypassed. Like, rather than bringing Ben back to life by becoming young again, he's again just really shut off alone in his own corner of Klaus, when the first season finally has him coming out to the rest of the siblings and still being a presence and still being around. So instead of actually exploring that dynamic, exploring what they mean to each other, really delving into the characters and like their sibling bond, it's no longer there. And that's a major problem because you can have all the fun, exciting, and incredibly well choreographed set pieces and action pieces in the world, and this season has some really impressive ones, but without anything to ground it, anything really hold on to and make that actually have impact, it just won't. So possibly most egregiously of all is the fact that the story, so much as it can even be said to be a story, is full of nothing but the most generic, formulaic, and just so self-referential and self-aggrandizing fluff. And it gets worse because when you're at the end of it and the entire even pretense of a narrative falls apart, you realize and you look back and you understand that the entire story didn't even need to happen because, like, in the 3rd episode, they introduced a MacGuffin that would have solved everything at that exact moment, but the characters don't even pay attention to it and they don't even really bring it up again. And so why introduce that? It's sloppy writing. It's sloppy everything. It's sloppy character, sloppy environment, sloppy texturing. And it's all for what? It's all to be this kooky show when the first season was more than that. The first season could have led to something that was worthwhile, sustainable, and could have had a long-lasting legacy. It was that good. This season has nothing to it. And that's a shame because this one was pretty terrible, boring and just god awful and painful to even think about and sit through. So overall, 2 thumbs down. And I won't be returning for a 3rd season because the 3rd season this sets up sounds even worse. And for a number score, 3 out of 10. Anyway, let's move on to Stargirl, episode 12, Stars and Stripes, part 1. This was also one of the worst episodes of Stargirl. I know I said last week's was, but this one is near up to it. And it's not even worth discussing. I'll just get right to the main problem with it. It's an episode and it's a season capper that makes everyone just so idiotic and just so unlikable and just has no passion to it, has no heroism, has no actual momentum for an adventure. It's CW style melodrama. And the biggest and probably the most obvious sign of that is that CW shows the heroes are never really heroes. They're just sort of heroic by circumstance. And it never gives them any time to shine or to actually perform acts that are altruistic or that are selfless. They just do it because of selfish reasons that align to selflessness. And that's why I stopped watching the shows. Because so far, Stargirl has bypassed that until this episode. Discover the full scope of the Injustice Society's plan. And they just sort of fall for it. Like, they're that dumb. They're that stupid. That they decide that, hey, maybe the people that have murdered our friends and family and loved ones have a point, because they're saying, oh, hey, they might want universal health care and for people not to be racist anymore. Maybe they're the good guys. I guess it's meant to be commentary. It's meant to be like socially aware and topical, but it makes all the characters come off as dumbasses and unlikable because, hey, Our Man, isn't your whole character arc about how they murdered your parents when you were like 4? And you've been really, really centered on that to the point where it's become annoying and, like, honestly, really irritating. But the fact that you hear them say universal healthcare, you're like, maybe they're the good guys. Oh my god. It's even if it was meant to be a joke, it would be dumb. It would make the characters look insanely insipid. And I just couldn't take it seriously after that. It's one of those things where it's like, you can't actually write well done drama and cohesive stakes. So you force the characters to be insanely dumb about it. Like, if you can't write that well, don't include it. If you can't write nuance, don't pretend to have nuance. If you can't, make a multi-layered story, don't force it to be one when it can't be, and when it can't structurally handle it. And this season and this episode couldn't. Overall, 2 thumbs down. It's awful, awful stuff. And lastly, we have Doom Patrol, episode 8, Dad Patrol. And this was a pretty decent episode. It's nothing exciting. I don't have that much to talk about because it's also just very placid. It's a very unassuming episode. It's pretty much just 2 character pieces between Cliff hanging out with his daughter and, the Chief hanging out with his daughter, and just their days together. And so nothing much happens in it. It's nothing that is just, really exciting or really kind of centered around some sort of plot hook. It's a very easygoing episode. There's obviously some tense or dramatic moments that I think really do work, but it's something that, it's really hard to dig into. I think that the most I can actually really say about it is that the actress who plays Dorothy, the little kid actress, is really wonderful. I think she carries the episode, like, in terms of the multifaceted character beats that she gets. It's really hard to understand or really see any kind of child actor pulling that off, but she does, and it's honestly really engaging, and it's something that I think really stands out as a. So kudos to her. Other than that, I really do hope the season finale, which isn't really the season finale, it's going to be kind of a amalgam of the penultimate episode and I guess whatever scenes they were able to shoot. Overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. Anyway, that's it for what I watched this week. As always, I want to say thank you so much for listening this week. I was going to ask for questions, but then I felt a little bit, uneasy. So I just want to say thank you to anyone out there who's ever sent a question, comment, or topic. It means so much to me, and I'm just so grateful for that. And again, thank you for listening. I just want to give a shout out to cover artists for this show at DOTEMCEE. Please check them out. They really deserve any of the traction they can get. Hope you have a great one, and see you again next time.